This topic I'm going to be talking about today is the Greatest Commandment. Do you know what the Greatest Commandment is? Do you know what the two greatest commandments are? Can anyone tell me? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. And what's the second one? Right. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the greatest commandments. And basically, how do you live that out in the world today? And before I entered the seminary, my home parish was St. Bernard's in Wauwatosa. Have you heard of it? It's right in the village, on top of the hill. And because I went there, I learned a lot about St. Bernard. And he was a Cistercian monk, a French monk. He was born in France and lived in France his entire life. And if anyone knows anything about the Cistercian order, it's that they're a quiet bunch. The order thrives on silence. Tilly! Sorry about that. I forgot her leash. They're a silent, I have to remember, I'm being recorded. They're an order that thrives on silence. And why silence? Because St. Bernard believed it is through silence where you gain intimacy with God. And, even as a deaf person, there's no joy then to be able to take my hearing aid off and just to be able to listen to silence from 9 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock the next morning. I'm profoundly deaf, and I can't hear anything without a hearing aid. So you would think, even with somebody who's deaf, can't hear everything, but yes, I do enjoy the silence. Do any of you do like that? I mean, my dad used to be very uncomfortable with silence. So the first thing he did when he got up in the morning is put WTNJ on, and he'd listen to it all day. Okay, he was not comfortable with silence. And like I said, St. Bernard reason that silence was important was to get in that contemplative mode, to be in tune with God. The basis of my talk today is coming a lot from St. Bernard's writing. He wrote 86 homilies. Now, we're not going to go through all of them tonight, okay? I'm going to spread them out over a few years, okay? But he wrote 86 homilies on the subject of love, and especially spousal love between a man and a woman. It was beautiful, and he takes that and he uses that relationship between a man and a woman as our basis of our relationship with God. And what's sad is that I gave this talk once to teenagers, telling them about love and the fact that we were born to love, we need love, and we can't give love until we receive it first. And they look at me like I'm speaking a different language, because they don't quite understand that. They can't quite grasp it, and so they easily get lost. So, to love God with all your heart and all your soul, and your neighbor as yourself, I'm going to expand on that, but I'm going to go a very different way than you probably would expect. If you had Mass this past weekend, do you remember the second reading? Does anyone remember it? On St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, on the litany of love. And I bet you, out of all the weddings I do, I would say 90% of couples use that reading as part of their wedding ceremony. And so how I want to start this is we're going to read that second reading again, but I'm going to break it up, and I'm going to ask some of you to read off the screen. Is there anyone that have bad eyes that can't read? Okay, I can't pick you. Can't pick, okay. Well, here's how we'll do it. What does Scripture say about the greatest commandment? And the basis of that is on St. Paul's litany to love. Would you like to read the
Sure.
first two paragraphs?
First two paragraphs, sure. Brothers and sisters, strive eagerly for the greatest spiritual gifts, but I shall show you a still more excellent way. If I speak in human and angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal.
And if I have the gift of prophecy and comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing.
If I give away everything I own, and if I if I hand my body over so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
Love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous, it is not pompous, it is not inflated, it is not rude, it does not seek its own interests, it is not quick-tempered, it does not brood over injury, it does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth.
It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails.
Ken?
If there are prophecies, they will be brought to nothing. If tongues, they will cease. If knowledge, it will be brought to nothing.
Sue?
For we know partially and we prophecy,
When I was a child, I used to talk as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. That's what a child is.
How about anyone back there? Go ahead.
At present, we see the infinite wisdom of the earth, and faith to faith. At present, I know partially, then I shall know fully, as I am fully known.
So faith, hope, love remain, these three, but the greatest of these is love.
Remember that? Did anyone have this on their wedding, as part of their wedding reading? Okay. That's hard. That's hard to do. And I'm not even married. But the point is, this is the basis of how we learn to love. And if we learn to love, we're able to keep the commandments that God has given us. But you can't reverse that. You can't say, I'm going to keep the commandments and then I'm going to love. It doesn't work. And I'll tell you why later. Pope John Paul II, one of my favorite saints, said something very interesting. He said, there isn't a single person in this hall, including your children, who does not want love. Every person is created, in other words, hardwired or programmed, to be loved first and then to love. Love is everything. I say that because if your children aren't experiencing love in any way, shape, or form, it will be very difficult for them to express it to others. They can't give what they do not have. You know what? That's like anything in life. You can't give of yourself anything unless you first possess it. Okay? And I like that because no one in this room disagrees. Does anyone disagree with what I just said? We can't. Because what would be the basis of disagreeing with me? Love is everything. When you know that love isn't everything, then it doesn't become important. And you know how everything is today. It's funny. An increasingly polarized society, we're disagreeing about almost everything. And you see what it's doing to our country. And it's just, no one disagrees with the fact that love is everything. Did you ever hear that argument on CNN or Fox that love isn't everything? No, because it's basically, that's probably one of the few things that we don't disagree with, that we actually agree with. This is very important. I don't even know if you know this, but maybe you sense it. If you don't believe that love is everything, you know what that means? You have to replace it with something. Remember, you're wired for love, but if you're not receiving it, you can't give it away. So there's this emptiness, there's this sadness inside. So we fill it with something, and it's done in 3 ways, okay? To compensate for this lack of love, people will create faulty expectations of themselves, of God, and of others. That's how they cope with a life without love. And the first one, you see people have faulty expectations of themselves. They will create lofty goals for themselves and try to attain them. And when they don't attain them, they fall apart and start all over again with a different goal. And it's this constant gerbil on the wheel that creates a lot of sadness in life. We're trying to fill up with something. Like, I remember I was on vacation last week, and my sister's a big Packer fan. And you all know what happened on their first game. Well, as soon as I got by my sister, the first 2 hours was to get this thing about the Packers out of her system, because that's all she had. I mean, now football means nothing to her because the Packers are not in the play. When we don't have the love, the satisfying love, we'll replace it with the Packers. We'll replace it with our phone. We'll replace it with anything that will give us a temporary sense of satisfaction. That's what keeps people going when they don't believe love is everything. Faulty expectations of God. This is happening a lot today. We don't really place high expectations on God anymore. In other words, we don't really pray to God for anything. We don't expect Him to answer, especially the impossible things that He wants to do in our lives. So you know what happened? We don't count on Him anymore. In other words, dismiss Him. Faulty expectations of God, faulty expectations of ourselves, everything we do to try to replace the love that's not missing in our hearts. The faulty expectation of others is the third one. When you're created for love, can you just love yourself and be happy? No, we are created to be in union with everybody. That's what's called the mystical body of Christ. It's everybody. And if the faulty expectations we place on other people is mainly because that's what you see on a lot on television today. We see ourselves as morally righteous or superior over others. And so we create this dividing wall or this rift that somehow we're better than them. So instead of bringing people together, we divide people. Again, when somebody that does not believe that love is everything, these are the three main things that they do, and that leads to a very joyless life. So love comes into focus right now, and we all just heard the 13th chapter on love. It is proof that we are disciples of Christ. To say it simply, we need this because without love, there is no joy. Okay? Love is patient, is kind. It's a nice idea. When we reduce that reading to all these wonderful ideas, do you know that we're actually falling in to what the culture believes in the fact that they think love is a feeling? It's a blip, it's a high rise on the roller coaster before we plateau. St. Paul said, no, love is an action. Love is an action. I don't think anyone disputes that, right? But you ever watch these television shows, sometimes it's like, oh, brother. Beginning with verse 4, St. Paul gives a list of 7 things that love is and 7 things that love is not. And here's something that St. Bernard caught in one of his homilies. He said, the English translation comes off as a bunch of adjectives. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love does not brood over someone else's injury. But St. Paul uses the Greek word which comes across as a verb. In other words, what St. Paul is saying was what he's really talking about. Love does patience. Not love is patient. Love, you see the work I'm talking about? Love works for patience. Love does kindness, works for kindness. Love does not do rudeness. Love does not do jealousness. Very different. I want to give you a story before of an example of this. Last week I was with my nephew, and really a wonderful family. They got 2 children. One is like 3, maybe 4 months old. The other one is about 3. So I stopped over for a visit, and my nephew had just finished giving the baby a bath, put on a new diaper, put some brand new clothes on, smells just like Johnson & Johnson powder, fed him, and what he did was he laid a blanket on the living room floor, and then the baby was there. And then he goes in the kitchen and I don't know what he was doing. And I was in the living room with the baby. And guess what happened? The baby threw up. Do you remember what it's like when your child threw up? I mean, it went all over these beautiful laundered clothes. And then I didn't know what to do. I'd never had a baby before. So I kind of said, we have an issue in the living room. And so he comes out of the kitchen. The look on his face, I could just see the frustration. You know what I'm talking about, right? The frustration. Oh. He didn't say anything. He just gave me the look. I don't know if he was mad at me, but So what did he do? He picked up the baby, gave it another bath, put another diaper on, put a different set of clothes on, but he didn't feed it this time. But you know what? I just explained to you love in verb form. Love in action. He did it because that's what needed to be done at the moment. So you get the idea when it comes to love. It's just in those moments of hard work or frustration that this is what you have to do. So now that I told you that, let's do a gut check. Okay? Carmelo does patience. Carmelo does kindness. Carmelo does not behave rudely. Carmelo does not get jealous. Do you remember when you used to do an examination of conscience, we would use the 10 Commandments before we would go into confession? I think St. Paul's hymn to love can also be used as a form of examination of conscience. And to be honest with you, I want to stop there. That's as far as I can go. I didn't even get to the other ones yet. In other words, I realize that I fall short, even just on those 4 bullet points right there. How about you? Did anyone get 100 on it? No. If you were, you'd be lying to yourself. Because it's just very, very hard to do. And this is the point I'm trying to get at, is this is how much we need the Lord to help us purify and get us on that track so that we can love the way Jesus loves us. Because when we don't do that, it robs us of joy. It robs us of joy. So, what's the point? What's the point? St. Paul is very clear that love is an action that chooses to do certain things and chooses to not do certain things. To say that love is not passive but active is why the church fathers always agreed that the opposite of love is not hatred. What is it? It's indifference. It's indifference. That's why I don't see a lot of hatred in our country. I see a lot of indifference. And that's just as bad. That's just as bad. You know what? I think I'm at the halfway point. I am. 10-minute break, because the next part of the speech It's about a particular sin that we all have, but we don't really acknowledge. But I'll get to that now that I've laid the groundwork for you. Okay? 10-minute break, and then I'll go find my dog. Oh, now you come. Any questions? Okay. Do you have any question? She's hungry. Neither of us are eating tonight because I gave her a couple potato chips. Were most of you able to go home and have dinner before coming here? Okay. Does Father Philip talk long?
Yes.
He does. He loves to talk. Do you notice that? He's good, but he loves. I guess it was cold last week, and he finished his talk early, and everybody went outside, and the doors were locked, and you couldn't get to your kids. So Karen Bushman said, this time, don't let them leave earlier. They're gonna. So, but anyways, if you want to stay down here and wait until the kids are almost let out, then go. That would be better. Okay. Oh, the Catholic Herald. Okay. That the recent one this week?
I just saw it here. So
Okay.
I think so, yes.
Last week. Okay. Hi, what are you guys doing? They cleaning it?
The dartboard.
Are you guys rigging the board? So,
We're refinishing it. Painting
refinishing
it.
it?
Yeah,
How come you don't cover the hole?
didn't get to that yet. That's next. Next
Really?
color.
What do you cover it with?
Just paint.
Oh, I see. It's got to be thick enough, right? So.
Yeah.
But if it's too thick, then the darts one.
Oh, they stick.
You sharpen the points.
They're
I
sharp.
see.
Yes.
Have you ever cut yourself or poked yourself?
Yeah, I pick it up and stab myself in the hand.
Okay. I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just a patch job till summertime.
Okay. So you can paint without your hand doesn't move?
It does.
Yeah. You're very steady. How about you?
I'm doing good.
It's kind of dark.
Yeah. Well, this is the practice board.
Oh, I see.
So
And Nick made you do this side.
This
Yeah.
is a good one.
I mean, he's doing that side, I'll do this side, and then we'll switch. He'll do the green, and then I'll do the gray on that side.
I see.
Yeah. So we're not on top of each other. I'm painting on him, he's painting on
Okay.
me. You know.
Okay.
Good evening, Father.
Hi.
I've got coffee if anybody wants some.
In nice room?
in our room.
Okay.
So before they can leave, they have to sign up.
You're always thinking.
Just trying to.
Is everybody back? Looks like it. Okay. Okay. The second part leads to, remember I told you, if we remember the three things we fill our hearts with when we don't believe love is everything. Okay? We fill our hearts with other things. Then we learned about that whatever we do, we have to make sure we were called to do it, to live in the moment, to live for God, to live because God is love. And that's how we're wired. And we can't change that. We can't do some kind of surgery to make us undo this. It's just like when you order computers. We can customize it to make it anything we want, but we cannot do that with human beings. God made us to love. God made us to be in community with other people. God made us to be social. He did not want us to live alone. God made us for love. Okay? Living out our discipleship in the world. I'm going to introduce you to one of the capital sins. It's called acetia. Acetia. Have you ever heard of that before? Maybe when you were growing up and you were taught the 7 capital sins, they used the word sloth. Okay? St. Thomas Aquinas uses this name. I like that name. And the same with St. Bernard. He chose that name in particular in describing one of the 7 deadly sins. Do you know why it's called a capital sin or a deadly sin? Because these are the sins that lead to all the little minor sins. Now, I don't want to say venial sins because they can be mortal too. And most of the capital sins are pretty self-explanatory. You know what pride is, right? You know what greed is. You know what lust is. You know what envy. You know what gluttony is, especially when you're hungry. And I know anger pretty well. Even though I have a nice face, I get angry a lot. And the last one is acetia. Acetia literally translates into lack of concern over the thing that we ought to have concern over. That's a sin. When we don't show proper concern over something that we should be concerned about. That's acetia. The reason why St. Thomas Aquinas uses acetia was because what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of sloth? animal. Did you see them? What? There's a commercial on TV that has that animal on, and I don't know if it's moving across the road or what, but it's going very, very slow. So it's coming to you. Hey, a 20th century German philosopher once said that acedia is the fundamental ill about time as moderns. That's us, you and me. It's common to use sloth instead of acedia because we immediately think of that animal that moves really slow. So we conclude that sloth is associated with laziness. But it isn't. I'll get to that. Acedia is not the same as laziness. You know why? Because it can also express itself in excessive activity. We all know what that is. I do it all the time. We're going from one thing to another, busy, 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 stop for a little bit, busy, 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 and you can be a workaholic and still suffer from acedia. But that's not laziness. Acedia is the habit of wanting to do everything except the one thing we're supposed to be doing right now. Have you ever heard of the phrase of the Noonday Devil? Has anyone ever heard that before? Saint Bernard coins that term because it was used in the monastic days when some of the desert fathers and mothers left the convent and went into the desert and built their own huts. And that's where they stayed, away from everything else. And they called these huts hermitages. And these hermitages where these desert mothers and fathers stayed. And the Noonday Devil was the time when, they had just eaten breakfast. And it's midday. And that's when the sun is the hottest. And you still have a siesta and a supper coming. So what is that period of time between after breakfast and before siesta is called the Noonday Devil. And these desert mothers and fathers would actually look out the window and see, well, what could I be doing right now instead of praying? What could in other words, they were looking for something that would keep them from doing what they were supposed to be doing. See, I don't know if you heard of St. Anthony in the desert and St. John Cassian. Those were people who left their monasteries to live in the desert. The reason why you were put in the desert is that to keep you from your distraction and that you were able, so that you can be able to pray. Now, I wanted to, but when you're in these huts, you're trying to look for something to fill your time other than the praying. And sometimes we think of procrastination. That's a word I like to use. You know what? It's a word like when you tell your kids to do their homework, or that You have a project that you're supposed to be working on. You want it done now. And your kid is doing nothing about it. Your kid's doing, it's just, it has to be done, but we're being lazy or procrastinating about it. It's simply doing anything else but the thing we're supposed to be doing. Mom, I'll take out the trash. But then you don't, and you watch YouTube. That's procrastination. That's not acetia. Acetia is a sin. St. Thomas Aquinas says ultimately that acetia is a sin against love, it's a sin against charity, and it robs us of joy. Ultimately, our spirituality should always point and lead towards the love of God. He's the one that created us, hardwired us to be loved. And in order to be sustained, we need to have that connection with God. And so the question becomes, do I have a lack of concern for spiritual things, for spiritual matters? Am I apathetic, indifferent towards God? Whenever we're apathetic towards God, it leads towards spiritual sadness. You know, we're still one nation under God. That's what our money says. But what's troubling our society right now is apathy towards God, even becoming increasingly evident in that for many people, God is continually moving further and further away from them. God isn't moving away from them, it's the people are moving away from God. And as a result, if we create an apathy, a spiritual sadness, and that temptation we're being fed every single day. I have to admit that after a long day, the last thing I want to do is go home and pray. Because I'm tired. I haven't eaten yet. The ultimate aim in worshiping God is to keep Him first. So I put a self-reflection because I'm going to be totally honest with you in the fact that would you be scandalized if I told you that it's very difficult for me to pray given the schedule and the amount of responsibility I have in 3 churches, that sometimes I don't get to pray until I'm almost half asleep? Does that sound like you too? And I'm constantly trying to get in tune with God so I can be grounded in God. But there's always that temptation. It seems like the more I do, the more I'm falling, the further behind I get. So I'm not praying the way I should be. And St. Thomas Aquinas says ultimately, when you're moving away from God, there's an emptiness, there's a sadness, because we're so used to filling it up ourselves with other things. Other things, not God, who can give us that love, but other things that tell God that that's more important than prayer. So what's the remedy? What's the remedy? For me, I have to be attentive to what's pulling me away from prayer. And you know what? I think it's working. After a few weeks, I'm getting up earlier in the morning, going to bed earlier, Instead of 11 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock. My body isn't quite used to it yet, but it's getting there. But to be able to wake up at 5 o'clock and to be able to pray 3 times a day, sometimes 4, regularly. And I actually do feel better. I actually feel like I'm more with it. I'm still behind in my work. There's still the pile on my desk, and yeah, I'm getting at it, but I'm back to doing what's more important. What's going on in my life that contributes to acetia or spiritual sloth? And for me, it's busyness. What is the remedy? The church fathers says is love. St. Paul says you can have other good things in life, but if you don't have love, it's really nothing. You can do many great things, but if there's no love, forget it. Forget it. I thought I was going to stay up last night to finish this talk. And I was in Burlington for a funeral. A classmate's father died of a heart attack while he was snowmobiling. So I was at that funeral. I thought, geez, I'm not done with this. And I'm like, I'm going to pray. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to get up. I was up at 4:30 this morning, half hour earlier than usual. And I finished most of the talk then. And that's the best I can do. But you see, I normally, I don't have this talk done. The first thing I'm going to do when I get up, I'm going to get that talk done. And then I got to write the homily, or think about the homily for the school mass this morning. And then I got to meet so-and-so at 9:30. And it's just, what happened to morning prayer? Oh, I'll get to it later. Like I said, by that time, I'm just way too tired. But here's what happens something I would like to share with you. I don't know if there isn't anyone in this room that doesn't want to be more patient, that doesn't want to be more kind towards the wife, the children, the co-workers. We don't want to be rude. We don't want to hold on to jealousy. Listen to this point. It's very important. It's not a matter of you going to bed tonight and saying, tomorrow morning I'm going to start this. Remember, when we don't have love in us, we put expectation on ourselves only to fail. The reason I say that is that we need the love in us. And as human beings, we have a finite or a limited amount of love. But that's not the same way with Jesus. Jesus, God is love. He has infinite amount of love. But the only way to receive that love is have that contemplation, that connection with Him. And that's what I'm working on right now. And I invite you to try that. And when people come for spiritual direction, or even for confession, a lot of like, oh, I'm not patient with my husband or wife, and this is, and so, Father, but when I leave confession, I'm going to work on that with that. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to pray for it. You have to ask God to help you, give you the love that you can turn around and be able to be patient. Go ahead and do what you want to do. You're going to fail. But if you ask God to give you the love that you need to be patient, then you will see some improvement. So the more our hearts are conformed to Jesus, the more we have the love to be patient. and not be rude. Especially that driver that cut me off in front of Pick and Save this morning. He missed the turn, but I laughed. What else can you do, huh? But you see, be on guard against acetia because it's a robber of joy. It opposes love, and our joy can be increased to the extent that we conform our lives to Jesus. Okay? That's my talk. Questions, or comments, or thoughts? Was this helpful? Otherwise, it's 7:15, and there's 15 more minutes, right? Thank you all. Okay?